Some people imagine that monsters are born in shadows, with fangs and cold eyes. But Mara knew better. Monsters wore wedding rings! They paid bills on time! They smiled at their neighbors in the grocery store. Monsters didn't start evil. They started like her. Good, tired, and just a little too willing to swallow the hurt. She was 33, with the kind of face people trusted without question. Soft brown hair, eyes that still caught the light when she laughed. Though laughter had been rare lately, she worked as a nurse in a small-town clinic, the kind of place where patients remembered your birthday. And yet, lately, Mara had been feeling like the kindness was something she had to dig out of herself with a spoon. It started small. An elderly patient snapping at her because his wait was too long. A doctor taking credit for her extra work. A friend canceling dinner plans without so much as a sorry. Little things. Paper cuts on her soul. And Mara, like she always did, smiled through them. But on Tuesday morning, something shifted. Her shift began at 7 a.m., the air smelling faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. A man came in with his daughter, a 5-year-old with a deep cut on her knee. He balked at Mara before she even touched the wound. "Don't mess this up," he said, his voice thick with disdain. His little girl stared at her with tear-glossed eyes. Mara's hands stayed steady, but her chest burned. She wanted to tell him off, to remind him she'd been patching up people like him for 10 years without thanks. Instead, she said, "We'll take good care of her and finish the job." When they left, the doctor muttered, "Parents, these days." And just like that, Mara's quiet anger folded into something heavier. She thought of her own father. His sharp voice, the way he could cut her down with one sentence. How she'd learned to never talk back.
By noon, the clinic was packed. Flu season always turned the waiting room into a coughing chorus. Mara moved between patients like muscle memory, blood pressure, prescriptions, gentle words for the frightened ones. She'd always been proud of her ability to stay calm no matter what. Then Mrs. Keating came in. 78 years old, perfume like powdered sugar, and a mouth like a buzzsaw. "You've gained weight," she said instead of hello. "You should really watch that. Nurses are supposed to be healthy role models." Mara froze for a heartbeat. Then she smiled, the polite kind that didn't reach her eyes, and walked her to the exam room. But inside, she felt the words lodge in her ribs. After lunch, she sat in the supply closet for 5 extra minutes, pretending to check inventory. Her hands trembled just enough for her to notice. She wasn't sure if it was from anger or exhaustion. She thought about how everyone expected her to be unshakable, the steady one, the healer, the listener. No one ever asked if she had enough left to give. No one noticed that she'd stopped calling her friends first, or that her fridge was half empty because she didn't bother cooking anymore. That evening, after her shift, Mara walked home instead of driving. The air was cool, the street lamps humming softly. She thought about the father from the morning, about Mrs. Keating, about all the little cruelties that piled up like stones in her chest. She stopped at the corner store for milk, and the cashier barely looked up. "Card declined," he said flatly. Mara frowned. She knew she had money. She handed over cash instead, but the embarrassment bloomed hot under her skin. The man behind her sighed loudly, as if her delay had ruined his evening. That was when the thought came, quick and uninvited. What if I didn't have to be good anymore? She shook it off, paid for her milk, walked the rest of the way home. But that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she felt it again, that strange, dangerous curiosity. She'd built her whole life on being good, on swallowing her anger, on forgiving everyone. What if she stopped? By Wednesday, the heaviness hadn't left. Mara had slept, but not deeply. She'd woken twice in the night, startled by dreams she couldn't quite remember. Only the feeling, something crawling under her skin, something restless. Her morning routine was muscle memory. Shower, coffee, hair pulled back. The blue scrubs she'd worn so many times they'd lost their crispness. She caught herself staring at her reflection longer than usual. She didn't look angry exactly, more like she'd been holding her breath for years. At the clinic, things were no better. The first patient of the day complained that the water in the waiting room was too warm. The second argued about his bill as though Mara had personally set the price. She told herself these were normal frustrations, that she was being overly sensitive. But deep down, she knew better. By noon, she'd plastered on her smile so many times she wondered if her face would ever go back to neutral. Her coworker, Jenna, noticed. "You okay? You seem off." Mara hesitated. She could say "I'm fine" and end the conversation, like always. Or she could tell the truth, that she was tired of being everyone's soft place to land, tired of swallowing the poison and pretending it didn't taste bitter. "I'm fine," she said anyway. And something about the lie made her chest ache. That afternoon, a patient named Harold came in. He was a regular, widowed, mid-60s, known for talking too much about his glory days. Normally, Mara didn't mind him, but today, Harold wouldn't stop making little jokes about her being too pretty to be single and how she should smile more. She tried to brush it off, but when he left, she felt dirty somehow. It wasn't what he said. It was how it stayed. Words like that clung. When her shift ended, she stopped by her mailbox before heading upstairs. Bills, coupons, a note from her landlord reminding tenants to keep noise down after 10 p.m. Her neighbor's music had been keeping her up for weeks, bass thudding through the walls. She thought about knocking on his door. But she knew what would happen. He'd apologize in that half-smile way, promise to keep it down, and nothing would change. People never changed. Mara's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her older sister. "Hey, Mom's birthday dinner is at 7 on Saturday. Don't be late this time. No. How are you? No. Can you make it?" Just a reminder not to screw up again. She didn't reply. At home, she made tea and sat on the couch, TV on for background noise. She scrolled through her phone without really seeing anything. Friends posting perfect dinners, perfect partners, perfect smiles. She couldn't remember the last time she felt like posting anything. Her mind kept circling back to the same thought. It wasn't the big betrayals that wore her down. It was the little things. The sighs, the dismissals. The way people could make you feel small without even noticing. The little things stayed. Around 9 p.m., the music from her neighbor's apartment started again, louder than usual. Mara stood in her kitchen, tea gone cold in her hand, and felt something pulse in her chest. She could ignore it. She could put in her earbuds, try to sleep, and wake up with the same dull ache tomorrow. Or she could do something. Mara set down her mug and walked to her door. Mara didn't knock. She told herself it was late, that knocking would be polite, but polite wasn't working anymore. Instead, she turned the knob, stepped into her neighbor's apartment, and found him sitting on the couch, shirtless, beer in hand, TV blasting. Music thundered from a Bluetooth speaker beside him. Jesus, Mara ever heard of knocking? He said, laughing like she'd done something funny. Ever heard of turning your music down? Her voice was steady, colder than she expected. He smirked. Relax, it's just music. Something in her snapped at that. Just music. Like her sleep didn't matter. Like her life was something to be talked over. She walked to the speaker and pressed the power button. The sudden silence was deafening. Hey, you can't just. Actually, I can, she said, meeting his eyes. Her heartbeat was a drum in her ears. And if it's this loud again, I'll make sure your landlord hears about your other habits. She glanced at the beer cans littering the floor, the faint smell of weed in the air. His smile faltered. You threatening me? I'm promising you. She turned and left without waiting for an answer, shutting her own door with a final, satisfying click. She expected guilt to set in. It didn't. Instead, she felt a strange lightness. Not joy, exactly, more like relief. For years she'd bitten her tongue, let people cross her, convinced herself she was being the bigger person. But standing there in her own apartment, heart still racing, she realized something dangerous. It felt good to push back. The next morning at the clinic, Mara noticed the same old patterns. A patient complained about waiting too long. A coworker asked her to cover their paperwork just this once. Normally, she would have agreed, even if it meant staying late. But today, she looked at Jenna and said, "No, I've got my own charts to finish." Jenna blinked, surprised, then shrugged. Okay. That was it? No argument, no anger, just okay. All this time, Mara had been bracing for backlash that never came. And now she wondered, how many other things had she let happen simply because she didn't test the limits? At lunch, she sat alone in the break room scrolling through her phone when a notification popped up. Her sister again. "Don't forget Saturday. Mom's expecting you. No, please." No, how's your week? Just another order disguised as a reminder. Mara typed a reply, then deleted it. She tried again, this time with fewer words. I can't make it. Her finger hovered over send. For years, family gatherings had been non-negotiable. You showed up, you smiled, you let the jabs slide, the ones about her not being married yet, about her working too hard instead of settling down. She hit send. Almost immediately, the typing bubbles appeared. What do you mean you can't make it? Mara locked her phone and set it face down on the table. She didn't owe anyone an explanation tonight. That evening, she stopped at the grocery store on the way home. In the self-checkout line, the man behind her kept inching closer, his cart bumping her heels twice. The old Mara would have smiled apologetically, even though he was in the wrong. This time she turned and said, "Back up. Now." His eyes widened. He muttered something under his breath, but he stepped back. It was such a small thing. But as she left the store, Mara felt it again. That rush, that quiet, dangerous satisfaction. Back home, she curled up on the couch, tea in hand. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the world was pressing her into the floor. But she also knew something else. This wasn't going to stop here. By Friday morning, Mara felt different. Not happier, just sharper. She moved through the clinic with a strange calm, like she was watching everything from a step outside herself. The first patient was 20 minutes late, no apology. He handed over his forms with a sigh, like she was the one wasting his time. Mara could have rushed him in, tried to make up for his delay. Instead, she marked his chart late arrival to be seen after scheduled patients. He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "That's gonna take forever," he complained. "Then you should have been on time," she said without looking up. The words landed like a slap, and it felt good. At lunch, Mara overheard two of her co-workers whispering in the break room. Her name came up, followed by the sound of muffled laughter. She didn't know what they were saying, but she didn't need the details. She'd been in enough workplaces to know that kindness rarely kept you safe from gossip. Normally, she'd ignore it, let them have their petty moment. But today, she took a different route. That afternoon, she made a casual stop by the clinic manager's office and mentioned she was concerned about how often Jenna and Rachel stepped away from their stations together, especially during busy hours. She didn't outright accuse them of slacking, just planted the seed. She told herself it wasn't revenge. It was fairness. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. When her shift ended, she walked home slowly, her mind turning over the day. She thought about how easy it was to tip the scales. Just a word here, a nudge there. People called it manipulation when it was ugly, but when it was subtle, they called it being strategic. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister again. "So you're really not coming tomorrow? Mom's upset." Mara typed back, "She live." No smiley face, no apology, just the truth. That night, the bass from her neighbor's apartment started up again, quieter this time, but still there. Mara didn't march over. She didn't shout. Instead, she slipped on her shoes, stepped outside, and found the breaker box for their side of the building. She flipped his power off. The music cut instantly. Through his window, she saw him get up, confused, looking around. She stood in the shadows, heart pounding, a small smile pulling at her lips. She waited a minute, then flipped it back on. The music didn't start again. Inside her apartment, Mara made herself tea, the steam curling in the lamplight. She thought about how easy it had been. How quick. No confrontation, no risk of him yelling back, just results. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe she'd been wrong all these years. Maybe the reason people stepped on her wasn't because they didn't care. Maybe it was because she didn't make them care. Before bed, she stood at her window, looking out at the quiet street. The world looked the same, but she didn't feel the same inside. She felt capable. By Monday morning, Mara had learned something important. You didn't have to wait for people to cross your line. You could draw the line around them first. The clinic was already humming when she arrived. Patients filled the waiting room, and Jenna was at the desk, clearly overwhelmed. Mara walked in, set down her bag, and noticed the stack of overdue charts on Jenna's station, charts that should have been filed last week. Normally, she would have helped. Instead, she picked one up, saw that it belonged to a patient scheduled for that morning, and quietly slipped it into the missing paperwork bin. By the time Jenna realized it was gone, the patient had already complained to the manager. Mara watched from across the room as Jenna tried to explain, her voice tight. She'd get a warning, maybe worse. Mara didn't feel bad. Jenna had been whispering behind her back for weeks. Around noon, Harold came in again, the widower with the two familiar jokes. He smiled, called her sweetheart, asked if she'd found herself a man yet. Mara smiled back, but this time she didn't just brush it off. When she entered his vitals into the system, she flagged his blood pressure reading as concerning, exaggerating the numbers just enough to trigger a mandatory follow-up. It meant more tests for him, more hassle. Was it wrong? Maybe, but she told herself she was looking out for his health. Even if part of her knew she just wanted to wipe the smugness off his face. When she left work that evening, the air outside felt too still, like the pause before a storm. Her sister had sent another message. Mom says if you loved her, you'd be there next time. Mara didn't reply. She deleted it. She wasn't in the mood to go home yet, so she wandered down Main Street, past the diner, the pawn shop, the rows of parked cars. She spotted Mrs. Keating, the woman who'd told her she'd gained weight, crossing the street toward the pharmacy. The sight of her made Mara's teeth clench, and then an idea. She followed at a distance, pretending to browse a shop window until Mrs. Keating went inside. Mara slipped in after her, moving to the next aisle. When Mrs. Keating set her purse in her cart to reach for something on the top shelf, Mara stepped closer, just close enough to nudge the cart forward so it drifted away from her. It rolled past the end cap, turning slightly before bumping into a man coming the other way. The purse tipped. The man looked startled. Mrs. Keating turned in confusion. "Watch it," the man said sharply, and Mrs. Keating's face went red. She sputtered something about not meaning to, but the moment stuck, that brief flicker of humiliation. Mara caught it, savored it, and slipped out before anyone noticed her. Back home, she sat at her kitchen table, eating dinner by lamplight. No music from the neighbor tonight, no texts from family. Just quiet. She should have felt guilty, but instead, she felt in control. And control, she realized, was addictive. It started with a list. Mara made it on a quiet Tuesday night, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. She wrote down names, not many, just the ones that lingered. People who had crossed her in ways small enough to be excused but deep enough to be remembered. Jenna, Harold, Mrs. Keating, her sister. Her pen paused. Then she wrote her neighbor's name at the bottom. She stared at the list for a long time, not to question it, but to decide where to start. At the clinic the next morning, she watched Jenna move between patients, her smile fixed, her laugh just a little too loud. Mara noticed things now. The way Jenna skipped certain safety checks, how she cut corners to save time. By lunch, Mara had documented 2 incidents on an anonymous form. She didn't embellish. She didn't have to. The truth, presented at the right time, could be just as lethal as a lie. She didn't linger to see the fallout. That wasn't the point anymore. That evening, she walked home under a sky smeared with pink clouds. She passed her neighbor's car in the parking lot, a dented old sedan with a fresh inspection sticker. She thought about the smell of weed that drifted from his apartment some nights. Then she noticed the faint crack in his windshield. She didn't even think, just reached into her bag for her keys and dragged the edge across the glass. Not deep enough to shatter, just enough to make the crack worse. It was fast. No one saw, and the thrill was immediate. At home, her phone buzzed. "You're still ignoring Mom?" her sister texted. "She doesn't deserve this." Mara typed back, "She had 33 years to deserve me." She hit send before she could overthink it. By Thursday, Mara had moved on to Harold. His next appointment wasn't for weeks, but she remembered something he'd mentioned, a part-time handyman job at a local church. A quick search online gave her the church office number. She called during her lunch break, lowered her voice, and said she thought they should know about some inappropriate comments Harold had made to female patients. She didn't give her name. She didn't need to. When she hung up, her hands were steady. That night, she sat on her couch, no TV, no music, just the hum of the refrigerator. She thought about the list, how each name was a weight, and how, one by one, she was lifting those weights off herself. She told herself she wasn't ruining lives, she was restoring balance. But in the stillness, she also knew there was no going back now. The list was almost finished. Mara kept it folded in her coat pocket now, a small, creased piece of paper she checked like some people checked their bank balance. Only one name remained: her sister. It wasn't that her sister had done one huge thing. It was the years of small ones, the lectures, the orders disguised as reminders, the way she spoke to Mara like she was still 15 and in need of correction. Her sister lived 30 minutes away in a neat little house with a perfect little family. Saturday was their mother's rescheduled birthday dinner, the one Mara had already refused to attend. But this time, she didn't just plan to skip it. She planned to end it. That afternoon, she stopped at the hardware store, bought nothing suspicious, just a gallon of weed killer, cash only. She tucked it into a canvas bag before anyone could see. At home, she poured herself coffee and waited for dark. She wasn't nervous. That surprised her. She thought she'd feel some hesitation. But all she felt was clarity. Around 9 p.m., she drove out to her sister's. The street was quiet. Her sister's car parked in the driveway. She knew from years of family visits that her sisters prized. Hydrangeas were her pride. She'd once yelled at a neighbor's kid for riding a bike too close to them. Mara stepped out into the cool night, unscrewed the cap, and poured the weed killer along the soil. She worked slowly, deliberately, making sure it soaked deep. It would take a few days to work, but once it did, the plants would never recover. It wasn't violence, not in the way most people understood it. But Mara knew it would cut deeper than words ever could. On the drive home, she passed the church where Harold worked. She saw him outside, carrying a ladder to his truck. For a moment, their eyes met in the dark. He didn't recognize her. She didn't stop. By the time she got back to her apartment, the street was empty. She locked the door, made tea, and sat in her chair by the window. The list lay on the table. She picked it up, crossed out the last name, and let the paper fall into the trash. There was no rush of triumph this time, no sharp satisfaction, just quiet. She realized then that she didn't need the list anymore. She didn't need permission. She didn't need to wait for people to push her over the line. She was the line now. She thought back to the woman she'd been, the one who smiled through insults, who forgave without being asked, who believed kindness was its own kind of armor. That woman was gone, and the world hadn't even noticed. She stood, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle around her like a familiar coat. If Mara's story made you think twice about how people change, don't stop here. I have more stories that dig even deeper into the dark side of the human mind. Subscribe now, share this video, and tell me in the comments, at what point do you think a good soul truly breaks?